Hey guys, welcome back. Part 3 of a 5-part series. Once again, breaking down the steps that led us up to our independence from Britain and the American Revolution. Right now, what we're going to go through is we're going to go through the Tea Act. The Tea Act basically comes right on the heels of the Townshend Act. The Townshend Act wasn't all that successful. Most of the people had begun to boycott those goods that were taxed. So what winds up happening is Parliament pulls back and says, fine, we'll just leave a small little teeny tiny tax on tea just because we can. Well, now that we get into the Tea Act, you got to understand the problem. What's happening is the colonists, because of this teeny tiny little tax, are not buying tea anymore. So a huge amount of tea is beginning to pile up on the shores back in England. And those shores happen to be warehouses owned by a trading company called the British East India Company. The British East India Company, if you remember when we talked about it in class, I sort of likened them to the UPS today. They're this huge shipping company of Britain, and if this shipping company goes under, it's going to hurt an already very struggling, hurting, limping along British economy. So what winds up happening is this company comes to Parliament and says, help us out. You got to help us out. You got to find a way. We've got all this tea sitting here in warehouses. The colonists aren't buying it anymore. How do we save ourselves? And Britain says, yeah, you're right. We do not want you guys to fail. If you guys go under, we're in trouble. So think. I've got it. Here's what we're going to do. And in order for you guys to really begin to comprehend the Tea Act, you have to understand the way tea was sold in the colonies. A boat would pull up to the docks, and they would unload the tea, and they would take it into a tea merchant in these colonies, and they would unload to the tea merchant. The tea merchant would pay a price, and then ultimately that boat could then leave the colonies back to England and load up for a second round. Meanwhile, the tea that was in the merchant shops in the colonies, they turned around and sold it for a wee bit more to make a profit off from it. So the example that I gave you is the British East India Company pulls up and they say, let's say $1 a bag of tea. And the tea merchants would pay that dollar to the British East India Company. They've got the money. They go home. Then the colonial tea merchants would turn around and sell it, again, just as an example, for $1.50 to colonists. Well, what winds up happening is Parliament comes up with this grand plan, and they said, you know what, I think we've found a solution. We're going to eliminate the middleman. So now what happens is the British East India Company pulls up to the dock, and they are going to sell directly to the colonists. They say to the colonists, you can come and get your tea right here. We're going to sell it to you. Now, if you remember, they were selling it to the merchants for $1, so ultimately they turn around and say to the colonists, here's what you're going to pay, and it's going to be a reduced price than what you were paying to the merchants. If you remember, they were paying the merchants $1.50 a bag. Well, now it doesn't cost that. So Parliament says, see, they're going to be happy. The cost of tea is going to go down. It's going to cost even less for them to buy their tea. They won't mind this little tax as long as they're saving money. And the British East India Company says this is great. If it reduces cost, they might even buy more, and we can get rid of this huge surplus. What happens, however, is Parliament, British East India Company, all of Britain, England is shocked because the colonists go, are you kidding me? You really think that's going to be okay with us? You know what you've just done, Parliament? You have just told us that it is more important for you to take care of a company back in England than to worry about a company here in the colonies. What about the colonial tea merchants who are here trying to just make a living for themselves, just trying to get by? You've just crushed their business in favor of an English business. I don't think so. We're not going to have it. They begin to stage, once again, these protests. Things are already stormy. They've already experienced the Boston Massacre, so they know what's at stake. And what it winds up happening is there happens to be 3 boats down in Griffin's Wharf one night in Boston, and those 3 boats are loaded with tea. Members of the Sons of Liberty go to the governor of Massachusetts, and they tell him, see those boats? You have the power, governor, to tell those boats to go back to England. Do not unload that tea here. The governor says, yeah, that's not going to happen. The boats stay. Those men go back to the meeting. They walk in and they give maybe Samuel Adams a little nod or something, and that lets Samuel Adams know that, hey, we couldn't get the boats to go home. Samuel Adams says this meeting could do nothing further to save the country, and with that, like, the doors burst open and a bunch of guys come into the room. They've got their faces all covered in coal dust and burnt cork. They've got blankets draped over their shoulders. They're dressing like Native Americans. And immediately, as if like on a symbol, they all, like some sort of code word, I guess, that when they bust into the room, they go out to the street and they head for Griffin's Wharf. They go down to Griffin's Wharf, they smash open all this tea, and they dump it over in the harbor. as a sign of protest. People are shocked. And even Adams himself says, this is John Adams saying, I can't help but think that this is going to have a turning point. It's going to be a turning point in history. Well, yeah, it's going to be a turning point, all right. The king and parliament are not happy. And what the king does next is going to be the big deal. So hopefully that kind of explains to you what the Tea Act is. It cuts out the middleman in an attempt to try to actually lower the price of tea for the colonies, but they're not having it. They're saying you're violating our right to free enterprise and we're not going to play. And then in a protest, they go down and have the Boston Tea Party. So again, if you have any further questions, stop in and see me. See me after class, but hopefully this clears it up. Okay? Until next time, take care.